Hello, thank you for spending about the next 10 minutes with me as I take this opportunity to share with you what we've learned over the last 21 years of implementing the LA model on the CU Boulder campus and gaining a better understanding of how it integrates with so many of our ongoing successful campus efforts. Learning assistants are undergraduate students who serve on the instructional team of various courses throughout campus. 450 LAs are hired each year for about 100 classes. They encourage discussions among groups in classes that actively engage students. And our goals we've always had 4 goals: curriculum and course transformation, discipline-based educational research so that we can measure the impacts of the transformations that we're making and make instructional decisions as a result. We always care about K-12 teacher recruitment and preparation, and at the foundation also is institutional change. And at the center or the heart of all of this are those undergraduate learning assistants, the learning assistant model, and the infrastructure for that model, as I'll say a little bit more about. Oftentimes, when people think about the LA model, they think about it at the course scale, focusing on the student learning or the student retention outcomes, or even on the learning of the LAs as they grow into excellent team leaders and in that experience. But there's also this important place to focus, which is on this institutional scale, where the focus really is on faculty learning, on departmental learning, on the program's response to what we're learning from the amazing faculty at CU as they innovate in uses of LAs. And so the institution continues to learn or experiences institutional change. Part of what happens is we change structures, and then that leads to changes in our values and our practices, which continues to change those structures towards a more equitable campus community. I showed you those goals. What's important here is to understand that at the institutional scale, by serving on the university-sanctioned classroom instructional teams, the LAs are disrupting power structures in and out of the classroom, leading to more opportunities for students to have voice in academic affairs as a normal part of operations at our campus. There are 3 pillars of the LA model. The first is content, where those LAs prepare for class and reflect on class with their lead instructor. And they inform the instructor in a couple of different ways. First, they can talk about how those students are experiencing the class or the curriculum, or even the physical space that we have set up. And they can provide that voice to the faculty member that leads the course. And they are themselves, the new LAs, are taking a weekly 15-week pedagogy course where they're learning practical strategies that can be deployed tomorrow, but at the same time, they're learning inclusive pedagogies that they are also using in and out of the classroom. And that information then is moved into the awareness of the lead instructor who meets with them each week. And we're now hiring advanced LAs and providing them with a whole course on mentoring training so they can then mentor the new LAs as they engage in that practice. You know, the LA model has grown quite a bit since we began in astrophysics with Dick McCrae in 2001. And here you could see that we're growing into many other disciplines beyond STEM. We have CMCI and communication on now, and we've been receiving inquiries from a variety of other departments. But as I stated earlier, we're building more equitable power structures and more inclusive campus community by creating a better feedback loop and more participation in the way we do academic affairs, frankly. We have courses with LAs, we have instructional teams, we have pedagogy courses with LAs, we have mentor courses, returning LA meetings for those students who've already had the pedagogy course, but they're coming back for a 3rd and 5th time, and they're not quite mentors, and faculty sessions. But if you look at the dots appearing along with the little key, the lead faculty, they're distributed throughout this system. Departmental coordinators are distributed throughout this system. New LAs, returning LAs, LA mentors, and LA program staff. So we're just providing more voice of more people in our own awarenesses so that we can get a better understanding of how all of us are experiencing the learning on our campus. And the LA program has shown many outcomes. These are published in the literature: increased number of STEM students obtaining teaching certification, improved learning outcomes in courses, especially for students from groups traditionally underrepresented in STEM. I'm sorry, I don't have that reference here. I'll get it for you. Decreased failure rates in gateway courses, up to 60% at CU Boulder. Greater persistence to graduation among LAs, up to 10%. STEM identity and leadership among LAs. Increased satisfaction with course and teacher. That work was done with the amazing LA program at CU Denver. Institutional change has been measured, and there is now a national research agenda on LAs, and a review has already been published on all things research LA. And there is a symposium, a research symposium that's been going on for 3 years of research focused solely on LAs. And increasingly now we're beginning to measure that LAs are fostering a sense of belonging in in-person and online classes. That work was done at Vanderbilt University, but we're able to demonstrate quantitatively that this is the case. And it shouldn't surprise us, because we know from the literature that social and academic integration and belonging are correlated with traditionally valued outcomes. There's a lot of literature along these lines, and this takes place especially for students from groups that are traditionally underrepresented in STEM. And so we set out back in about 2018 to try to understand what the LAs are doing. If these seem to be outcomes that are maybe a little different than we had anticipated, let's try to find out what they're doing to achieve these outcomes. So we asked, how do students view their interactions with undergraduate LAs, and how do students view their interactions with graduate TAs? And what model can explain how these interactions lead to valued outcomes, such as those learning outcomes, learning gains, retention, and persistence. And the data we used was interviews with 21 students in an LA-supported chemistry Gen Chem 1 and 2. And we only used 2 of 12 of those interview questions, because the interview was about all kinds of things, even things like, is your lab connected to your lecture? And so there are only 2 questions that were asked about LAs. Describe your LA, and what is the difference between an undergraduate LA and graduate TA? And then we verified that our findings with 794 pre and post LA written reflections before and after they were in LA. So they represented both the student and the LA, and from multiple years and multiple disciplines. And here are our findings. Everything that the student said fell into one of these 3 categories: knowledge, pedagogy, and the one that surprised me the most was social emotional, because originally when we built it, we were thinking along the lines of pedagogical content knowledge. But in knowledge, the students said that LAs have general knowledge, like even where to get mental health resources. They have knowledge specific to the class because they had just taken it. They have disciplinary knowledge. They have fresh knowledge, unlike the stale knowledge that we professors have. And they're invested in our knowledge development. And 18% of the statements that students made in those interviews fell into that category. In pedagogy, they said LAs explain better. They find out what I know before offering help. They help us construct knowledge rather than giving answers to us, and they offer general assistance. And 29% of the statements fell into that category. In social emotional, they said LAs are like me. They understand me. They care about me. They're approachable. They're personable. They figure out what I know without making me feel dumb. And 50% of those statements fell into that category. So, that surprised me, but then in reflecting on it, we're beginning to gain a better understanding of how those LAs are doing, what are leading to the outcomes that we're seeing. But first, let's take a quick look so we can compare how the students talked about graduate TAs. What is the difference between an LA and a TA? They said graduate TAs know more or different content than LAs. They're perceived higher than us. They do not have knowledge specific to this class because they took it a long time ago. The students also said that they direct the classroom. They're more like teachers. They're in charge of grades. They didn't really get what we were asking, and they explained sometimes at too high of a level. In social emotional, they said they're different from us. They're authority figures. They do not understand us. They sometimes make us feel uncomfortable. They stand over you. They're intimidating, and they're helpful. So while they love their LAs, their TAs, you can see how different the way they describe their LAs is from the way they describe their graduate TAs. So then we set out to say, okay, let's see what explanatory model can help us explain these outcomes. And so we set out to develop an explanatory model. And in order to do so, I'm going to present you with a variety of images of the same data that I just described and to try to make a point. So knowledge category, graduate TAs and likely professors, although we didn't ask about those in this study, are seen as legitimate participants in the discipline and in the institution. Graduate TAs and likely professors, they have control of information, they have control of grades, they have control of the classroom. In social emotional, graduate TAs and likely professors, they're harder to relate to and access. And yet these are the institutional practices. This is the institution. This is what's etched into our walls of our institutions. And yet the undergraduate students remain somewhat distant from these structures. And yet the LAs are both a part of the student body and a part of these structures. In knowledge, LAs are seen as legitimate members of the instructional team because they are. They're seen as having specialized training in pedagogical content and inclusive pedagogies. They understand how we feel. They know what we're going through. They know how to interact with us. So when we look at some of the statements that these students were making, and we place them on a scale from the institutional structures, we see that they increasingly approach the student sense of self. On the institutional level, LAs explain better. They have knowledge. They're approachable, but you start to see them understanding students and caring about them, really heading towards that student sense of self. And we believe that they are connecting those students to the institution through modifying the power structures so that there is greater voice given to students, both through the LAs and by the LAs. When we look at when we tried to verify our data with those interviews, those 794 interviews with LAs, we really saw that most of what the almost LAs or the experienced LAs said fell into one or more of these categories. So if we look at knowledge and pedagogy, they talked about LAs having pedagogical content knowledge. They help me learn. They talked about LAs as using inclusive pedagogies. They include me. And one that really showed up big time was that LAs invite students into the discipline because they still know where the door is. They invite me. And we really see these manifest in sense of competence, belonging, and identity among the students that are enrolled in our LA supported courses or have had access to LAs. So by serving on the instructional team and impacting these power structures, they're doing it by diversifying the instructional team. For example, if you just hire one student from a group that's traditionally underrepresented in that discipline or in college more broadly, you already diversify the instructional team tremendously, and it has a huge impact on so many of those students that are sitting in that class. They give students voice, they enact learner-centered strategies, like questioning, wait time, listening, feedback, formative assessment, and they convey students' experiences to the instructor and more broadly to our programs. One last representation I want to show you of the same data is a Venn diagram form, where here, instead of planes, we see our overlapping regions. But this visualization is useful because it helps us see what faculty and graduate TAs do really well. We operate more kind of in this pedagogical content knowledge area. We're amazing. But the LAs are really rounding out the instructional team by adding the inclusion, the belonging, and the voice, and giving power to student voice in so many of our academic affairs. And so we think that is a more complete instructional team and is leading to those outcomes that we value so much. One last image for you, just so you know what's up at CU Boulder. This is a year at CU Boulder. We hired 428 LAs that year. We supported 80 courses in 20 participating departments from 5 colleges and schools. And we impacted 25,000 seats. Some of those have some duplicated head count, so it may not be exactly with the students, but the cost after we try to remove for duplicated head count ends up being $45 per impacted student, which is a real bargain if the outcomes that we think we're seeing are real. So thank you so much for paying attention to my little presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have at any time. Thank you.